This is a download from BFM 89.9, the business station.
KL Mayor Datuk Nur Hisham Ahmad Dahlan has said that DBKL may be building micro-homes with the concept of it being capsule hotels to be rented out to unmarried working adults who fall into the low-income B40 category.
KL City Hall plans to launch the first micro-homes project at an old DBKL building in Jalan Tuanku Abdul Rahman and will be modified into 2 blocks, one for men and another for women, with 120 rooms each. The accommodation will have basic facilities and occupants won't be allowed to cook.
So the rate here is going to be rented out at 100 ringgit per month for each person, with applications to be made online. They expect it to be occupied by this year. And DBKL intends to expand its initiative on micro-homes to help the low-income group with their housing needs before they can get accommodations that are more comfortable.
The mayor hopes that this move will help reduce the burden, especially for those working in KL and where there is no convenient, cheap and comfortable housing. But he said the proposal would have to be first discussed with DBKL's Board of Advisors and the Minister.
Last February, DBKL and Think City displayed 2 units of micro-housing prototypes measuring 264 square feet by 320 square feet as a social experiment to see if Malaysians would be open to the idea of communal living. And Think City said its baseline study has shown that there were only 4,800 residents in the downtown KL area measuring 213 hectares, while the same area had around 54,000 workers.
Think City Program Manager Joanne Munn had then reportedly said that there was a need to have a wider range of housing options to attract more people to live in the city, suggesting the repurposing of old commercial buildings for residential use and communal living as one of the options.
I'm so happy to see this happening. I think other cities have been doing this or trying to solve this problem. Admittedly, cities that have higher density issues than us, places like Hong Kong, for example, have been working pretty hard to try and solve this issue of affordable housing within the city. And I'm just really pleased to see that we're getting at something that provides an affordable solution that nevertheless remains a solution that has, I think, hopefully, a sense of dignity, a sense of, being able to have a roof over your head, a comfortable roof over your head, and a place from which you can kind of build out your ambitions and save money and just all these different things that go into it.
This is such a fantastic idea, but the concern I have here is maybe private developers jumping on this and then somehow gentrifying it. They could start selling really micro homes or capsule hotel-like concepts at $1 million per little room that they could have. And that could happen.
It could happen, but it requires a lot of gentrification, I think, before that would actually occur. I mean, before you get those kinds of rates, even in the heart of KL. I also hope that as they move into doing this, and I guess we'll know once we actually see the prototypes, but I'm hoping that they don't have to be, 5-star residences, but I do think that it's important to give people a base. I mean, we talked about slow mornings earlier, and like I said, I recognize it. It's a total privilege. Not everybody is time rich. But it is important, I feel, just as somebody who is a bit of a homebody, I think it's important to have a place that you can at least feel like you belong. That you can place yourself in the world and build from there. And I hope that the surroundings, the atmosphere of the space is going to accommodate that.
Yeah, and while we wait for more details to come out, some questions I think that's important to ask is who is going to clean the compound? Will it have a management committee to deal with problems, in this building, right? To deal with things like broken pipes or maybe conflicts between neighbors?
Yes, because it's going to be, apartments and condominiums to some degree are already communal living. A lot of us live in tamans. Most of us have neighbors, really. But I don't think your neighbors are usually so literally on top of you, where you're really kind of put into the space and you're going to have to accommodate a lot of different people. You're going to have to accommodate a lot of different sounds, a lot of different types of living. And I think that is something that expectations need to be managed as well. And like you said, management needs to be pretty cohesive.
And I wonder if DBKL will be the board there. For what it's worth mentioning, they are trying to be more efficient, but with this added on to their load, I wonder if they can do this one well.
I hope so. I really hope so. I think it's a great initiative by the mayor. I think it's a great initiative to push forward on this. And I'm glad we're finally catching up on the matter. It's something that, like I said, other cities have been dealing with for ages. Let us know if you think this is a good idea. Let us know what other suggestions you might have for other alternate forms of housing. We do have a lot of abandoned buildings in the middle of town. We do have a lot of these spaces that are, I think, ripe to be adapted. Let us know your ideas. WhatsApp us at 018-789-8899. You can also tweet us at BFM Radio. In the meantime, let's head over now to Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, a senior fellow at the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. Dr. Carmelo, thanks for joining us. Can we start with an explanation of what microhousing actually is?
But in general, microhousing refers to the idea of having units that are fully equipped with all the basic living facilities and utilities, but accommodating a person in less than 300 square foot. So then we can have different concepts and different logic and ratio behind this, but in a very synthetic way, we can define microhousing in this way.
How did the concept of microhousing first come about?
Well, it's very different. Historically, I check in example, this dimension of having 300 square feet per person was very common in the United States after World War II. So this was considered the normal living space for a person. Then the concept evolved in different parts of the world. So, in example, if I look at Japan, I see that this is part of the general housing concept, so limited space and essential space, and somehow related also with some philosophy behind a certain concept of living. In other cases, we have similar development like Hong Kong, but in this case, I don't see a philosophy of wellness or essentiality behind, but rather the need to have a space that costs as less as possible in a city in which renting was growing quite expensive. So that's why I said we can observe different evolutions according to the different geographical situation that we decide to take into consideration.
So do you think this is a good idea for DBKL to build micro homes in the style of capsule hotels to be rented out to the B40 group?
Well, my answer on this will be twofold, in the sense that, as I declared in other occasions to the media, I believe that affordable renting is a concept that we need to explore more than what we have done so far, where we were mostly focused on affordable ownership. On the other side, I don't really believe that this kind of exploration should come from government entrepreneurial initiative. The risk is always the same, that it's not because I'm ideologically against government entrepreneurship, but because every initiative that is decided outside of the market risks to be a failure. The Prime Minister a few weeks back declared, I think it was in Penang, that business should be done by entrepreneurs because they live in the market every day and therefore they can discover unexploited profit opportunities. This was more or less what Dr. M declared. So he said the government will be okay with collecting taxes on that. He said we can basically get 26% by doing nothing, just letting business people doing their business. And I really agree with this statement because only entrepreneurs, people in the market, can discover the proper knowledge in order to decide which kind of initiative is the one requested by the market.
But would the government in this scenario have leverage, maybe in terms of having access to existing buildings that can be transformed into affordable housing?
In this case, I think we can imagine a role for the government, as you just mentioned. So if there are certain buildings that need somehow government intervention in order to be accessed and to be redesigned, let's do it. Let's allow the government to play a role in the terms of general framework. But then when these kind of buildings will be available for restructuring, for doing something else, let the private developers enter the game and decide what to do. I'm sure that if there is indeed a market, a profitable market for micro-housing in terms of rental, entrepreneurs will be there for exploiting these profit opportunities. In the end, also to speak in very simple terms, if you are the government and you are going to set up an initiative which is running on loss, someone is sooner or later going to pay for that loss.
So, Carmelo, when building a micro home, are there regulations for the minimum size requirements of a living space?
Well, I'm not aware of regulations in this side. I know that the government wants to develop new regulations for the new affordable housing that they are going to be built, and this regulation is in the opposite direction of micro housing. Is in the direction of having a bigger space, actually. So these are the information that I gathered during the debate in the past month. But in general, I'm against regulation on the minimum space. I would rather support regulations in terms of safety and minimum infrastructure requirements surrounding the properties themselves.
Earlier, you briefly spoke about some other countries that are known for micro-housing when it comes to serving the current objective of building affordable homes for the single B40 group. Are there other similarly dense cities that we could model?
Before I was clearly making the distinctions of Hong Kong and Tokyo, because in these two cases we had, yes, in both cases, the development of micro-housing, but the logic behind this was completely different. So I have seen pictures coming from micro-housing examples in Hong Kong, and they are really, really scary pictures of things that are really non-humans. Okay. While if you look at these situations in Japan, there is more a tendency toward minimalism rather than an idea of optimizing space to make things cheap. So I believe that if we are going to have such a development in Malaysia, it needs to develop according to the local demands and local expectations, and therefore these should be left toward private development in order to have a solution that really fits what the people want.
And you said earlier that you're skeptical about the government taking on that task of affordable housing and that it should be left to the expertise of the private sector. What sort of market interaction have private developers had in the segment of affordable housing?
These open a wider discussion about the property market in Malaysia in the past 10 years, let's say, which can be analyzed from different angles. But one of them is that we have experienced growing number of initiatives in the high-end market. Okay, so for what we cannot define as affordable, and this high-end market has experienced a bubble, which is moderating now, at least. And if you ask my opinion on affordable housing, I agree on the general consideration that probably not much was done in this segment of the market, but this was due to two reasons. One, very technical reason, which is the developers saw profit opportunities in high-end segment, and they focused there. But this scenario, I think, is changing because developers are realizing that profit opportunities are no more there. On the other side, I believe that the strong involvement of government in direct initiative on the affordable segment has crowded out private investment in the same segment.
Right, and last question before we let you go, Carmelo. At the moment, this option is being mooted for the B40 singles group. Do you see other segments of society benefiting from micro-housing? For example, the elderly. What are your thoughts?
Honestly speaking, if I look in general at the average Malaysian mentality, I don't see the average Malaysian really keen toward very small spaces. I don't see this kind of, let's say, Japanese attitude here in Malaysia. I think that Malaysians in general, for what is my impression, prefer to stay and to live in spaces that can really be considered livable, possibly with some greeneries around. That's my general opinion. But again, this is just an opinion. I'm not an entrepreneur, and therefore I would leave entrepreneurs to discover if there are business opportunities there.
Fair enough. Carmelo, thank you so much for your input. That was Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. And we're talking about micro-housing being something that's being mooted for the B40 singles group in Kuala Lumpur at the moment. And I guess the question here really is, you might not fall into that B40 group, but would you live in micro-housing? Are we ready for capsule housing being a solution maybe for urban sprawl, maybe just for, house prices? Is this something that we want to see? Would you like to live in a micro house? In the meantime, Raphael says, kudos DBKL, finally addressing the housing needs of the B40 who need to live closest to the place of work. Good sense at last. And we also have other messages here from KW saying 100 ringgit per month. Good luck to the house condition. Look at PPR and low cost apartments in town. And I think there is something to be said there. But hopefully, I suppose it's the size of the house that's going to assist with that in some way. Hopefully it's easier to maintain because it is so small. I do think, of course, it will be subject to the usual kinds of issues that we see in any house anywhere, no matter how much you've paid. But I take the point, but I also think that it needed to be balanced for the needs of the community that you're trying to serve. Yeah,
I think so. I just wonder if it's fair to make this comparison, and because to me it seems like the closest one to hostel and university accommodations in public universities, because that seems to be maintained all right-ish compared to, if we make a comparison here, I wonder if that's fair to draw those lines there.
I also think perhaps if you have a smaller space to take care of, it's easier. It's just easier to do so. As in for the person living there. I don't mean for management. Yes. Yeah. I mean, you have less to clean. You just have less because it's such a small space. Kevin says, in our country, we have many shop houses that are vacant or housing migrant workers. The B40 people in the B40 category can afford to rent them. No need for fancy capsule units. I think
the point of this isn't really for it to be fancy. The point of it is to be able to have a roof over your head in the first place.
Yes, and also, I suppose with the shop houses, there's still going to be work needed in order to segment off, in order to decide how much space goes to who. Because it's one thing to say, hey, they're shop houses. It's quite another to make shop houses actually livable for a certain amount of people, right? I mean, I guess studies need to be done about how many people can actually be accommodated within those spaces. Jack says DBKL, PPR, micro-housing disaster. I hope not. I think we're just going to be a little bit more optimistic on this front. For now, we might be proven wrong, but for now.
Though that comparison is undeserved, I think.
Let us know what you think, especially if you would live in a micro house yourself. For my part, I think perhaps not, perhaps temporarily, but I don't think long term. And this isn't meant to be long term anyway. Would you?
In a micro house, for the short term, it'll be fine, not for the long term, because I think in the long term, I'd like to have just a little bit more space to myself that I can comfortably live in, and I like my stuff.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. We might still just be too beholden to our stuff. Let us know, though, what you think about this micro-housing initiative. Would you live in a micro-house yourself? WhatsApp us at 018-789-8899. You can also tweet us at BFM Radio. In the meantime, we are headed to the news, but keep it here on the evening edition, BFM 89.9.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my, BFM 89.9, the business station.